Today's date is June 7th, 1995. Survivor Martin Winter, last name at birth Kujawski. Interviewer is Sherry Amatenstein, City and States, New York, New York. In the United States, language will be English.
The date is June 7th, 1995. The survivor is Martin Winter, whose name was originally Kujawski. The interviewer is Sherry Amatenstein. We are in New York, which is in the USA, and the language is English. Could you say your name and spell it?
My name is Martin Winter, W-I-N-T-E-R.
And what was the name that you were known by when you were growing up?
Kujawski, K-U-J-A-W-S-K-I.
And were there any nicknames or anything like that other than Martin?
No, not really.
Okay. What was your birthday?
6/26/29.
And how old are you right now?
Still 65.
And could you just say where you were born?
I was born in Lodz, Poland.
And could you spell that too?
L-O-D-Z,
Okay.
Poland, like in Poland.
Like in Poland, okay. And is that where you grew up?
Yes.
Okay. Could you describe your family and your home life before the war?
Well, it was a very normal family. I had 4 sisters. I was the only boy. My mother and father. My father had a rather large family. Had, I think, 7 brothers and 2 sisters. I had 2 sets of grandparents. Had a lot of cousins. What else can I tell you?
Were your sisters older, younger?
I was the youngest of the family. They were all older, except one sister was only a year older, so I was very close with her. The others were very close in age also, I would say.
What sort of work did your family do?
My father had a textile factory. He made certain linings, all kinds of cloth that I know, that I remember.
Did you ever go to the factory?
Our factory was pretty close to our house because it was right practically in the back of us. So we were very, very close to what was going on daily. And it was regular, just a normal life.
What language did you speak inside the home?
We spoke Polish and Jewish. I would say my father and mother spoke more Jewish than Polish to each other. But between the kids, we spoke a lot of Polish. It's the language of the country.
How large was Lodz?
It was the second largest city in Poland and probably the most commercial city. It was mostly textile. It was very well known for textile all over Europe, as a matter of fact. Lodz wasn't far from Warsaw, so most of the people that came to Lodz would visit Warsaw or vice versa. It was very close.
Do you know how large the population was?
I would say probably about 1 million.
And how many Jews?
It was at least 400,000 Jews. In some areas, the Jews were in the majority of certain sections. Since I said it was a textile city, most Jews were in textile. Yeah.
You were young, but do you remember any anti-Semitism, perhaps at school? Anything you were aware of?
I remember quite well. We lived across the street from a park, and most of the mornings that we went to school, we were always told to look people over, be careful. There were a lot of kids throwing stones at us, rocks. It wasn't exactly very safe to go. I remember my grandfather, should rest in peace, was stabbed in broad daylight by some of these hooligans that were around. We were all watching ourselves. I remember my sister also was injured by a guy that pushed her into a trolley car just because he knew who she was. So we were always worried.
Did they say anything also when they were doing it, like about?
Parshiv Žid, which means, well, for better use of the word, lousy Jew or something. We heard that didn't mean anything. But a lot of them were quite nice. So you balance it off.
How was it at school? How was it at school?
At school was no problem. We had no problems in school because the majority of the kids that went to school, especially in my area, were Jewish. So we had no problem. And the Gentile kids were pretty nice. You know, when you're a kid my age, I was only 8, 9 years old. I wasn't fearful of anything. But I knew how to watch myself.
In what way? How were you watching yourself?
Well, my father always gave me lectures, what to do, and to be careful, not go in certain parts of the park, because who would be hanging out there. He knew the kids, and he knew the tough kids and tough areas to go into. And he himself was always worried to be safe.
Did your family go to synagogue?
Oh, yes. We belonged to one of the oldest synagogues in the city, or maybe even Europe. It was called the Wilke Synagogue. And my father, having a very beautiful tenor voice, used to sing there quite often when he was asked. He had a magnificent voice, and I was sort of proud every time that he was asked to sing, being the son of a star.
And you sang too.
I did too as a kid also. And of course, when I came to the States, I pursued it a little. My father's brothers were all musicians and very musical. That was their hobby, and certainly my father's.
What were the holidays like?
Holidays were always very festive. We spent a lot of time with my grandparents, my father's parents mostly, because my mother's parents, they lived about 50 miles, and it wasn't very easy. Here, 50 miles is nothing. But in Europe, 50 miles at that time, especially in Poland, when I was in buggy, is quite a way. So we usually spent, and all my cousins, large family. We always had a great time together.
Were you the youngest, like at Passover, the Seders?
Well, I was the youngest in my household. I always got to ask the 4 questions.
You played soccer also when you were?
Oh, yes. Well, that was the game in Europe. You don't play football, you play soccer. And, you know, generally very good home we had. My father used to bring home Friday nights were very important to us. That was the big night of the week. My father used to bring home homeless people mostly. And we always had somebody at the table, strange people. We got used to them. My mother insisted that he clean them up because some of them really needed a little cleaning up. But it was always fun. And Friday night was, as I said, the big night. Everybody was in.
What would you say your happiest memories were growing up?
Probably the summers. We used to go away in the country, and we had a lot of fun in the country, being away from the city, and spending a lot of time with my cousins and some friends also, of course. A long time ago.
When did you first start being aware of Nazis, or when did you were very young when everything started
Well,
happening?
when the war broke out was 1939, and we were in the country that time. And my father came for us, and we couldn't get any transportation to get back to the city. We heard about the war was going to break out any day, any minute. It was, I think, August about the 25th or so of 1939. And he came for us. We finally got a horse and buggy. There were no trucks at that time. And we got back into the city, and a few days later, the war was declared on September 1st, 1939.
Before that, were you aware at all of restrictions being placed on Jews or things happening?
Oh, yeah, everybody was aware, you know. We had something to worry, to be safe. The main thing was to be safe. We always heard about stabbings, very famous stabbings. Here in this country, you hear about shootings, but in Poland, we heard more about stabbings than shootings, and everybody worried about their kids or about their family.
And what do you remember of the day that the war broke out?
I remember being very scared. We went to a fallout shelter. We did hear, I must say that Lodz was not damaged at all, just barely, but we did hear the bombs, and it was a whole new experience, frightening experience. Nobody knew what was going to happen, so it was quite a different way of life immediately. Everybody ran for cover.
How did life change? What was the different way of life?
Well, food was very scarce. Families were disappearing. Some went towards Russia, towards the Russian, towards the Ukrainians, to Russia to escape the Germans, and everybody went for cover, mostly. Nobody knew what was going to happen. The anxiety was unbelievable. My father worried because he had a German partner, and he was hiding him in the cellar for 7 days. And the Polish police came to look for him. They thought he was a spy or whatever. And as soon as the Germans came in, he came out from hiding, and he told my father that most likely this house will be taken over by German officers. That was our house. And my father looked at him like in disbelief. He says, "What are you talking about?" He says, "I am telling you that this will be the headquarters for the German officers." And it certainly happened. A few days later, I think it was about 3 days later, Germans drove up and told us to get out of the house. And we left the house just as we were standing there. In fact, my sisters were in nightgowns. And we had to leave the house. And it was a terrible, terrible night. I remember we had no place to go. We had to go to an uncle of mine that hardly had any room for us, but he took us in.
Were you able to take any
Nothing.
belongings?
Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. We just left the way we were, and we had no money. We had nothing. It was a horrible experience.
How far was it to your uncle?
Fortunately, my uncle took an apartment in the area that was designated for the ghetto. And that area was quite a distance from where we lived, but it felt a little safer because we felt that at least all the Jews will be in this one area and we'll be able to get an apartment there.
So you went there that night?
Yeah, we went there.
Did you walk?
Oh, yes. Yes, it was
How
quite...
many was it? Was your whole family?
My whole family. It was quite a walk.
How long did it take, do you think?
Maybe to get there? Couple hours. Couple hours.
And this was at night?
Yeah. Yeah, it was at night. There was no phone, so my uncle didn't know that we were coming. And there was no food that night. I was starving. And I remember being very, very cold. Very cold. We all slept on the floor, and the following morning my father got up and was looking around for quarters. We found a so-called apartment on the ground floor with a horrible smell in the room, and we found out later that the water was coming up to the floor. There was water in the cellar, and that had a horrible smell, but we had no choice. We had to stay there.
How large was the apartment?
You mean how small was it? It was terrible. We were 7 of us. In the beginning, we only had one room, but then we took over another room, which helped out a little bit. But it was a horrible place.
What were the sanitary conditions like?
Well, part of it was outside. Part of it was there was no such thing as sanitary services in the apartment. Part of it was outside. We had running water in the apartment. Excuse me.
What about cooking?
We had a stove. We did have a stove, but there was nothing to cook. We had hardly any food. It was several days till we got some food. It was mostly through my uncle that gave us some food. Soon after, it was announced that this area is becoming the ghetto, and it was the ghetto for many years after that.
Was there barbed wire? What was
Oh
the
yes,
setup?
the barbed wire went up immediately, and we lived. I would say probably in the heart of the ghetto. There was a dividing line where the trolley cars with the Gentile people were able to go from north to south, and there was a dividing. The ghetto was divided east and west, and we were right there by the gate, east-west gate. Later on, it helped me a lot, because when potato wagons passed by, I trained my wires to pick up potatoes from outside through the window, stab them and bring them into the house. And sometimes I begged 2, 3, 4 potatoes. It helped. It was no picnic.
How large was the ghetto?
The ghetto was quite large. It was in the oldest part of the city, and most of the houses were shabby. It was quite large. It was quite large. It was 2 sides to the ghetto, east and west. And you had a bridge, a wooden bridge that you go over from one side to the other.
Do you remember the streets? Any of the street names in the ghetto?
Well, we lived on Zgurska 10, which was actually like a main street. Yeah, I remember a few streets. I'd like to forget.
And do you remember
the German soldiers there? Were they?
Well, we had a guard right at the gate, and there were guards, I think, like every 100 feet. There was plenty of guards there, and a lot of them were homegrown Germans that were Germans from before the war, and they were just as bad as the Germans. Most of them spoke Polish also, but their nationality was German.
And what were they like?
How do I describe? You better not get too close to them because it didn't mean anything to shoot. So the ghetto, the ghetto was well guarded all around. It was very, very difficult for anybody that would say that they were going to escape. You couldn't escape. It was so well guarded. Germans know how to guard. It's their specialty.
Were you afraid to be out on the street?
No, not really. Once you were inside, I wasn't afraid to be on the street. Certain times I was, like in 1942, let's say, they had they called it the Sperre, which was 10 days that no one could go out, and they would come in the backyards. Houses in Europe are built entirely different. There was big backyards, and they would line everybody up. Everybody had to come out from the apartments, and they would pick out whoever they wanted. At that time, it was unfortunate. They wanted mostly children. They took all the children that they could find. A lot of mothers and fathers saved their kids by hiding them, but a lot of them went.
Did you hide at any point?
No, I didn't hide because although I was careful, I had an uncle. My uncle was the head of the fire department. He was also a scientist, and he developed certain pumps, water pumps, that were very powerful to put out fires. And the Germans knew of him, so he was sort of a big shot. He was also head of the fire department before the war, which is unheard of for a Jew to be fire chief, you know. And most of the time I hung around in where the fire department was, and felt much safer. And the Germans did not come there, although I did appear before the Germans in 1942. And unfortunately, I lost one of my sisters, which I'll tell you. We'll talk about it. Yeah.
Were you able to, especially in the early years, have schooling at all, or what?
Oh yes. You mean before the war?
No, in the ghetto.
In the ghetto, we had. Fortunately, we had several people in our apartment house, which was about 150 tenants, and they got all the kids together, and we had like practically private lessons, and we were all in several apartments, and we got very good schooling. In fact, I brushed up on my English there. I did. I learned English, so it helped me after.
Were you able to play at all?
I don't remember playing at all in the ghetto. No, I don't remember. If I did, I don't remember playing in the ghetto. We were always looking for food, ways to get some food.
What were some of the ways that you got food?
For a better word, stealing. I am not ashamed to say that my uncle had a lot of food from the fire department, and I was like his favorite nephew, and I helped myself quite a bit, very often. I was in his, very unusual because nobody had gardens. He had a garden that planted tomatoes and vegetables and everything, and I would steal from him. I would steal from any place that I could, even potato peels, just to get some food to my parents.
What was your uncle's name?
His name was Henry Kaufman. He was better known as Vetter Lemmel. He's very well known. Most of the people that were in the Lodz ghetto would know of Fatalemo. He was a very colorful character. He was the only one that was allowed to ride a motorcycle. He had a fire truck. He was the only one in Mobile. Otherwise, nobody had any transportation. But he did a lot of good things for people, and most people loved him. He could have been, sometimes he could get tough also. He's definitely made a name for himself. I read a book about Lodz, and his name was mentioned also in it.
Which book was that?
About Lodz in general. I think, I don't know who the author was, but I know it was by people from Lodz, and he was mentioned several times.
What did your father do in the ghetto? Was he working?
My father did hardly anything. There was nothing for him. It was really all menial jobs, nothing that would support a family of 7, you know. So we each helped out. He was very despondent in the ghetto. It was a very, very bad time for him. Very bad time.
Do you remember conversations with him or what he would sort of try to say to you to keep you going?
Oh yes, I remember a lot of conversations with him, especially when the last time I saw him, bad. The last time I saw him in the hospital. Forgive me.
Oh, it's fine, it's fine. We can get back to that a little bit
Yeah,
later,
okay.
too. Yeah. What were the Jewish leaders like in Lodz, the Jewish community?
Well, the one that stands out mostly is Chaim Rumkowski. He was the leader of the Lodz ghetto, and he was more like a king, or he thought he was a king.
Was that the book? There was a book called King of the Jews.
King of the Jews, yes, he was. He definitely was also. Was quite a guy. He had the power to deport people. Anybody that he didn't like, he was able to deport, because the Germans kept on asking for more people to leave the ghetto, and he would be the one to designate who goes first. And he made all kinds of speeches. Every day there was a different speech. But he was trying his best. You know, when you analyze it now and you begin to think, like, who was he? He couldn't help himself. He was actually not only trying to every day to make things happen for the best. He did accumulate a lot of bad people for himself, because when he got to Auschwitz, they practically killed him with their own hands, the people that he sent previous.
In winter. And we were talking about the man who was referred to in Lodz as the King of the Jews and the power that he wielded.
Yes, he certainly did wield a lot of power, much more than you can imagine. And he was, till the very end, I think he was the last transport to Auschwitz, and he had a very bad ending. As I said, they beat him up, beat him to death. And
The Jews from Lodz.
the Jews from Lodz that he sent to Auschwitz back in 42, 43, 44. They did kill him.
Did you ever see him?
Oh yes, I saw him quite a bit. He always used to pass our house, actually, because we lived, as I said, by the gate, and he used to go from east to west. And also, which we'll maybe touch later on, my father sang for him. Well, when he was in the hospital, he sang for him for the holidays. So we had a little contact with him for a brief moment. And his brother actually looked just like him. You couldn't tell the difference. I always thought it was him, but it was his brother.
Were people trying a lot to sort of be on his good side so that he wouldn't...
Oh, well, he had all the power that you could possibly imagine. Whatever he said worked. He made laws by himself. He didn't have a parliament or anything. He was the king.
What kind of laws was he making?
Well, you know, where you assigned to work, you know, and who goes where. Everything that was in the ghetto that was going on had to clear with him. We had Jewish policemen. He was the head of everything. He was the head of every department. And if he didn't like you, you were finished. When he liked you, it wasn't such a great thing either.
Why wasn't it such a great thing either if he liked you?
Well, he was kind of a man that was very hard to figure out his moods. You know, you never know. You never knew when he was going to blow up. And he was a character.
How did he come to get so much power?
Well, he was selected by the Germans. He spoke German. He was rather as I said, a very colorful guy. He was a good-looking man, very good-looking man, and dressed, very sharp dresser. He stood out in the crowd. And he was very, very accepted by the Germans as the spokesman for the Jews. And I think he liked that power.
When you say he was colorful, do you remember any examples of what made him colorful?
Just by the way he looked, you know. He had these large glasses and very, very white hair. And he was good looking and always in beautiful clothes. And he was chauffeured in a handsome cab with horses, the beautiful horses, policemen on both sides. He looked very important.
Do you know what he did before the war?
I think he was in textile.
What were the Jewish policemen like?
Very hard to describe because sometimes they could be very rude and very cooperative with the Germans, although they couldn't help it. It was their job. I know it was their job. But some of them just liked the idea of having power. And they did have a lot of power. And it was like, it was almost like a gang, sort of. I don't know if it's the right word, gang. But it was a certain type that became policemen. And they had it a lot better than the average person. They paid them well, they got more food. That was the difference, made a difference. Any little food made a difference.
Do you remember instances of seeing the way they were treating yourself or others?
I had no run-in with them personally. I was a kid, I was a youngster. But they went after you know, organized groups, so they would always break up any kind of demonstration if there ever was. I'm not that familiar with that part of it. I had my own troubles.
And were you, I know you were trying to get food. What sort of work, what sort of things were you doing to try to help out?
Well, I got a job in a leather factory. It just gave me a little bit of money, extra money, although I was very young. I worked very hard and was quite far from my house. And each one of us was trying to do some work to make it easier on my parents. Unfortunately, it didn't last long because everybody was getting sick and sicker and thinner because there just was not enough food to go around, and that was the problem.
Were you aware of people trying to escape from the ghetto?
It was very difficult to escape. Probably a few people may have escaped, but it was very difficult. As I said, every 100 feet you have a German with a gun, you know, and the ghetto was all fenced around with barbed wire. And even if you escape, where were you going to escape to? If you go to the Gentile side, there was a lot of people that snitched right after. You know, you couldn't hide. There was no place to hide. A Jew was always identified. You know, it was a terrible time.
The Yellow Star.
The Yellow Star was well. Even if you left, it didn't mean anything. If you left the ghetto without the star, you'll be discovered very quickly because there's no place to go. There was no place to go, no place to hide.
Were you aware if people had radios at all or any sort of underground?
When I was in, as I said, I hung around the fire department. I know of one incident where this fellow always brought news, and he was finally caught, and he was shot. He was shot, he was taken out. We never saw him again, but we heard that he was shot and killed by the Germans. They considered him a spy. There was hardly any radios. Nobody had a radio. That was a no-no.
Were you aware at all of anything that was going on outside the ghetto?
Yes, very little, but being with the fire department, being at the fire department, my uncle was taken to the city sometimes by the Germans, taken out of the ghetto because of his work, of his bringing out pumps, new motors, and he invented all that. And he would come back and tell us what's going on in the city, you know, how well the Germans were doing. We got a little bit news, not much.
How did you try to keep your spirits up at all through this?
Spirits were very low. That was something that we tried to stay above it, but it was very difficult. There was no fun growing up.
Did you witness a lot of beatings and shootings and things like that?
Not shootings. I did not. In the ghetto, I did not witness shootings, but beatings I did from some officers, Jewish policemen officers. Yes, I did notice that quite a few times. But you know, when you're a kid, you look at things different. Now, when you think back, the cruelty is much more severe now in my mind. When I think back, than I cared when I was a kid. But I remember quite well. Everything is very vivid, like it was here today.
Anyone in particular, any brutal episodes?
Well, I remember stealing, for instance, of foodstuffs would be a tremendous crime. I remember not far from us there was a bakery, and somebody broke in and happened to go to work. and there was a big commotion, and I stopped by and listened in, and I saw this guy was bleeding all over. They took him to, it was like a jail, you know, it wasn't an official jail, but the policeman took him away. There was no cars or automobiles, so they paraded him to the station, and he was bleeding terribly. We all tried to get more food.
When did the transport start?
The transport started in '44. You mean to Auschwitz?
Well, yeah, like the Speer that you were talking about, and when all the deportations started.
Deportation started in, I think, in May of 1944. I was one of the last transports, one before the last. I left with my, at that time, with my 3 uncles, my couple of my aunts, and some cousins. My family was already all gone.
I guess we should talk now about 1942 and what happened to your family.
That was the worst year for me.
Yeah.
That was the worst year. I don't know how to begin, but I guess I have to talk it out and maybe feel better. So terrible. Always starts the same way. I can't help it. I'll start with my youngest sister. My youngest sister was, she was having difficulty, not feeling very good, and fever, up and down fever. So we took her to this so-called children's hospital. And she was there for about a month. I'll come back to her. Just give you the outline. My father had something wrong with his knee. So he was checked into another hospital. And my sister, one before the oldest, was a little bit knowledgeable in nursing. But because she was very close with my father, she decided to take a job in the hospital and be next to my father so he can get some care. My middle sister, as I said, she was taken away September 10th. She was taken away on a wagon, and I know she was shot because she was trying to escape. Never saw her again. My oldest sister and myself were the only ones that kept the house going, sort of. My mother was very ill at the time. She was absolutely famished. She was starvation. She had flies all over her face. Couldn't feel them anymore. I knew she was in bad shape. One day, went to work, and I looked at my mother and I said, my God, I hope I see her again, because she really had so many flies on her. She was not responding to anything. So I went to my uncle, the fireman. I asked him to give me some drink, whiskey or vodka or anything to perk her up. I had no idea what it would do, but I thought maybe that would help. So he gave me some vodka. I took the vodka, brought it home, put it with sugar, and I gave it to my mother. And she drank it, and I felt so good. She even looked at me, you know, like with her eyes open, because I haven't seen her eyes in several days. get worse every time. I was going to work, and my mother called out all my sister's names and my father's name. And in a way I was happy because I heard her voice. I hadn't heard her voice in days. But then she became quiet. I came into the room and I said, Mom, I have to go to work because if I don't go, I'll lose my job. She didn't say anything. I walked back to the door. She called out their names again. And I left. I went to work. And about half an hour later, my oldest sister came. She never came to see me in the factory there. I knew immediately that my mother probably died. I said, is it my mother? And she said, yes. I came home, didn't know what to do. My mother, it was a time when there was a lot of deaths, and they couldn't bury her, and she was in the house for about 3 days. And we got some women to wash her, I remember, to clean her up, and they got shrouds. And we buried her ourselves because the workers could not get to her in time. It would have been another 2-3 days. So we decided to bury her next to my grandmother. And I went to work one day, and my custom was that I visited my sister in the hospital. I came in and they told me that she's dead. I said, that's a cruel thing to say. I said, I just saw her yesterday. She was fine. Well, it turned out that a lot of kids got certain shots that they gave them, and they all got killed. They all died.
Why did they give them these shots?
They were cleaning out the building. They were getting rid of the building. The building was supposed to become a factory. It was terrible. It was terrible. It was the shock of my life. I was very close to her.
So they just gave them these shots because they
Yeah,
just...
there was about 70 children that they cleaned out. Excuse me.
So this was something they did purposely, just to...
Oh, yes. And it all happened so quickly. And it was all like between August and September. My father, I went to work. This time I went to work in the morning, and I couldn't get through. It was blocked off, so I asked the people, what's going on here? They said, haven't you heard? I said, no, what's going on? And they told me that the Sonderkommando, which was a very, very feared group of Germans from the SS, Special Command, is cleaning out the hospital. I said, can't be. That was when my father, I told you that before, that my father spoke to me the day before, and he would not let me go. He kept on holding me, and I says, Dad, I gotta go to work. He kept on telling me that if I survive, or if anybody survives, go to the United States, America. You have relatives by the name of Benjamin Winter. And I was a little familiar with that name, especially with Benjamin Winter, because he was very well known in New York. Benjamin Winter was a real estate man. And he wrote a book also about the United States, and we had the book at our home before the war. I went to work, but the following day, as I said, I passed by, I couldn't get through to work. Turned out they were cleaning out the hospital. They were actually throwing out people from the windows right into a truck. And the truck had the exhaust pipe into the truck. So by the time they got to the destination, wherever they took them, they were dead. They were all gone. I ran quickly to the fire department to get my uncle. Maybe he can save him because he was such a big shot with the Germans, but it was too late. My father was gone. And my sister. Oh. Terrible. Now from 7, we're only 2. I only had my older sister, and she wasn't in good shape. She was also starvation, mostly starvation. It was terrible. She got sick. I had to take her to, not a hospital, there was no more hospitals. There was like a ward or something. 2 weeks later, she died. And I'm all by myself.
How
But
old were you?
I was 12 or 13, 12. I couldn't believe it. I said, I used to visit her every day, you know. She died, and I couldn't help it. But I had to go to my uncle to ask him to give me a hand to bury her because there was still backlogs of so many dead people to be buried. And nobody would even talk to me. I'm a kid, you know. And he told me that he's very busy. He's very sorry, but he's very busy. And that day he couldn't do it. I had to go back. I buried her myself. With my own hands. Had nobody to walk with me. Nothing. Oh, sorry. I came back to the house, and I looked around. I said to myself, I guess I'm next. What else can there be? I wasn't afraid for myself. There's nobody else around. My aunt came down. She lived across the way. And she says, why didn't you tell me that your sister died? I says, I went to your husband. And he told me he was busy. I didn't want to bother you. She had her hands full also. She says, well, you can't stay here. You know, you can't stay here by yourself. I says, no, I will stay here. I belong here. This is where all my memories are. And I'm going to stay here. I stayed for about 2 weeks in the house.
Who else was with you in the house?
I was all by myself now. But I saw the handwriting on the wall. I couldn't stay there. I was scared every night, you know, and being next to the gate was always so much noise. I decided to stay with my aunt. That was my father's sister. And that was the fireman's wife. It was better food. They were very nice to me, but still, it's not a father or a mother. Oh, God. I stayed with them until we went to Auschwitz. They treated me very nice.
How many people were there?
She lost 2 kids before, so she was only with her husband. And sometimes she had friends stay over, but mostly it was myself and my uncle, the fireman. I stayed with him for 2 years. And we went to Auschwitz together. We didn't have to go to Auschwitz. He built a tunnel in the fire department, in the area where the fire department was. It was probably good enough for 150 people with water, with food, with everything.
Did he do this alone?
No. He had a good group, very tight group of friends and the firemen that were there. And
How long did it take them to build the tunnel?
probably a year. He was the only one that knew in 1943 that there was an Auschwitz. Nobody knew about Auschwitz. Nobody believed it. Nobody wanted to believe that it was Auschwitz. But he was the one that knew it, and he was trying to persuade my aunt to stay, you know, to hide out. And she didn't want. And so he obliged her, and he went with the group. We all went to Auschwitz together.
What happened with the tunnel that he was building?
Nothing. I think about a dozen people took over the tunnel, stayed. They saved themselves. All their families saved themselves. But we went to Auschwitz.
Was that all that was saved through the tunnel that you?
That's all, yes. Nobody else got in on it. There weren't that many people that knew about it. It was very secretive. You see, they were digging, and they were able to take the waste into his garden and hide it that way. It was very, very unique, very unique.
Did you help at all with the tunnel?
No, I was not in that group, and actually I was treated kind of almost like his son. I have great admiration for him. In fact, my little grandson that was just born, my daughter honored me with taking his name. I liked that. He was special for me. He saved me in Auschwitz. When we got, there was another beautiful experience going to Auschwitz. We must have been about 70 people in that.
Well, when exactly? Were you taken?
August 1944.
So this was one of the two transports that you were talking about?
We were going to stay, as I say, hide out, and we stayed and stayed and stayed. And the ghetto was emptying out. There was hardly any Jews left in the ghetto.
How many people were in the ghetto?
At that time, probably about 250,000.
And how many had been in the ghetto earlier, as it was?
No, when we left, there was hardly any Jews left. But in general, I think there must have been about 250 to 300,000 Jews in the ghetto. But so many died out, and so many were shipped out before that. So there was really no count on them. But we went to Auschwitz, and of course, there was some ride, you know.
Well, do you remember the whole day and what happened that day when you were first taken for the transport? Where were you?
Oh, yes. There was a section in the ghetto called Marishin, which was like the end of the ghetto. Was the last stop, and there was trains that were coming in. When we got there, all we saw were Germans and some Jewish policemen, not many at that time anymore, but most of the German policemen, Gestapo, you know, hitting from front and back, hitting all the time and yelling continuously.
Winter. We were talking about the day that you were taken to Auschwitz.
Well, as I said, the Germans were hitting us from all different sides and yelling to get on the train, get on the train. I got on the train with my uncle and several other uncles that were still alive, my father's brothers, basically, and a few cousins.
What were the Germans hitting with?
Rubber hoses, whatever they could, and with their guns, you know, the carbines, everything. Just hitting for no reason, hitting and yelling. That's all you heard. We were all scared, but nobody knew where we were going. Nobody knew we were going to Auschwitz. I heard of it, but I didn't believe it. We got in there, and there was a
Did they have names and were they doing it that, or just shoving
no,
people
just
in,
shoving,
no checking, no
shoving,
anything?
shoving people in. Each train had a German inside the train, guarding us like we were going to escape. And we had like a can of water, large can, like a garbage can of water, and one for waste, which lasted maybe a few hours, and it was filled up, and the stench was terrible. The only good thing about it was that the German guard had the same stench for him as it was for us. And this was no fun trip. It was 6 days.
How long was the train? How many cars?
Oh, there must have been about 10, 12 cars or
And
more.
how many people per car?
We must have been about between 70 and 80 people. There was no room to sit down or anything.
Windows?
No, we were able to look out. You know, there was very, very little splits like that we could look out and see where we were, but it didn't make any difference. We were so tired out, and some of us had seats and some of us had to stand. We stopped several times, and we would stay in a station, you know. Some native people, some Poles or Germans, I don't know exactly who it was, would bring us maybe apples or something. We couldn't get it anyway, so.
How did they see you or try to bring you the apples? How
They-
did they do it?
They came near the trains, and the trains, when they stayed there, the Germans made sure that they get some rest to go outside the train, you know. But it didn't make any difference to us. We were not interested in anything.
So they saw what was going on then?
It was in Poland still.
Mhm.
That was right in the beginning. Later on, we didn't see anything. Nobody there to greet you. We got to Auschwitz.
Well, you said the trip took 6 days?
6 days, yes.
Did they let you out at all during
No.
the 6 days?
No. We were not out at all. Day and night. Just, we were so scared out, you know, like it was such weariness that you couldn't care if you lived or died. It made no difference.
Did people talk at all?
Oh, yes, people talked, you know. It was a lot of crying kids, you know, and older people that didn't feel well and all that. You know, it's quite a ride. 6 days to be locked up in these carts is a long, long time. We were happy to know already that we came to a stop, that we were going out, you know, that we were leaving the train.
Did people die on the way on the train?
Not that I know in my train. Maybe in other trains, I don't know. But in my train, nobody died. We came out, and in front of me was my aunt and her 3 little boys that were very close cousins to me. And unfortunately, they were taken away right in front of me. At first, they took only one boy.
Was it day or night when you arrived?
Day.
What did you see when you first... Did they chase you off the train?
Just everybody. It felt almost like when we left Lodz, hitting and yelling and shouting, and schnell, mach schnell, go fast. That's all. But we realized immediately that there was danger there, big danger, because my aunt was like one of the first ones with her kids. They grabbed one kid and they practically threw him up on a truck. That was the bad side. And she said to the German, "Where are you taking my son? I want my son back." He hit her and pushed her, and she says, "I'm going with him." So the other 2 kids went with her, and of course we know where they went. My uncle, the fireman, hit me in the face several times. and it really hit me hard. And I said, why are you doing this to me? He says, you're very pale. You have to look healthy. When you go up front, you have to look like you have red cheeks. I thought it was just that he got crazy or something, but he meant well. And when he came to the Germans knew of him, that he was coming in that train, and I was really shocked. And he held me by my hand, and he says, he's coming with me. And I had a uniform, a fireman's uniform, before we left. He gave me a fireman's uniform, and I had a band here that said Bote, which means runner. Meant nothing. But it just was a little something that he was able to hold on to me, and he saved me. He literally saved me. We went to the baths later.
What did you see going on during the selection process? What were you aware of?
Well, we saw the women undressed. There were marching women that I remember. I even saw my aunt. This was a period of time, you know. I saw my aunt, the fireman's wife. I saw her. She was saved, but she died later on in camp anyway, and so did my uncle. But we saw her, and we saw what was happening. The men was separate, the women was separate, children was taken away, most of them. Oh, I forgot to tell you, my grandfather came with me, and they took him away. In the last second, they took him away. He was quite healthy looking for some reason, but they took him away. He was an older man. They took him, but he made it up to the last minute in Auschwitz. And from there, we went to the baths. My uncle came over and told me, he says, you're not over the danger yet, because they're selecting again people in the baths. Look them over to see if they're physically fit, you know. And they gave us some, what they call de-lysing. It's a spray that burns the life out of you in your gentle parts. It was unbelievable. It was like fire. And then they shaved our head in the center. It was called Lodz, which means the street for lice. That's the actual interpretation. That's so you can't escape. You have no hair there. They shave it completely, make a bald spot. From there, we went out to the place where we actually were not far from the ovens. We saw the fire. We saw the big chimney. We stayed out there, and we were threatened with all kinds of threats to give up every valuable diamonds, watches, jewelry. We had nothing anymore.
Had you brought anything with you on the train?
They took everything already. When we changed the clothes, they gave us these striped uniforms, striped clothes like the prisoners, blue and white, and wooden shoes, you know. They took everything away. We had nothing. We had nothing to fear. My uncle brought stuff with him, but he gave everything up. He wasn't going to take chances. We stayed there till about 4 a.m., till we got into barracks that were Polish horses used to be there before.
So this was all day, because you said...
All day, yes, all day. No food, nothing. My uncle brought me a piece of bread, a large piece of bread. I don't know where he got it from. Till this very day, I don't know. And he, like, covered me with his body. I said, what are you doing? He was a heavy-set guy. I said, you killing me. He says, eat the bread, because if anybody sees it, they'll take it away from you, and they'll kill us for the bread, you know? He says, eat the bread, and I ate it very quickly, saved a little piece for later, and saved my life. I was so starved. It was midnight already. We had nothing to eat for days. We got into the barracks about 4 a.m., and I got a good beating for nothing. I don't know why this Jewish capo, this is the first time I learned about capo, what the capo means.
And what does Kappa mean?
Kappa was like a leader of a group of prisoners from the prisoners. He was selected by the Germans because of his strength, maybe, or he looked a little stronger than anybody else, and he was like the leader. He was made to lead the group. And they had a lot of power also. And also, they were hitting us in front of the Germans so that they looked good to save themselves. Got a good beating. I don't know why. And I was so cold. It was so cold. It was all stone.
What did the barracks look like?
There was some straw on the floor. It wasn't a wooden floor. It was like a stone floor. There were horses there before the war. And it was wall-to-wall people. We just laid next to each other. There was no beds or anything. Everybody was on the floor.
Do you have any idea how many people were there?
I would say probably by the 1,000. The whole transfer that was saved. I mean, of course, a lot of people were taken away, but the ones that were saved were all in there.
Do you remember the number of the barracks or anything like that?
The name escapes
Yeah,
me.
okay.
I know exactly what it looked like, but the name escapes me. And we were assigned all kinds of work there in Auschwitz. It was a terrible time, and I took sick. I had high fever. I know I had high fever because I could not even walk at the time. And my uncle took me to, there was like a little section, a little place where sick people went, but you couldn't stay there very long. And he came right after me and he says, "Listen, Martin," he says, "don't make yourself comfortable. This is not a hospital. This is just a place where you can stay a little better off than the barracks are, but don't make long-range plans and don't call the nurse here. You know, there's nobody there. You just stay there." He says, "Because by tomorrow morning, you will be out of here, but you will be in the ovens if you don't get out. You got to get better." Believe me, this was good medicine. I started to feel better immediately. I stayed overnight, and he came in the morning and took me out and went right back to the barracks. And I felt good. I felt good. I made sure. I stayed there about 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks.
What was the daily routine at Auschwitz for you?
Waiting for the water soup, to get soup, going to work, doing just nonsense work.
What sort of work was it?
Cleaning, digging, just absolutely nothing worthwhile. It was nothing. Some people went to there was a Messerschmitt factory, the defense factory. They went. I didn't. I just got work. They gave me work to clean up and just nothings. Just a wasted time, you know. I didn't get hit after that. After that first night, I didn't get hit anymore. But I heard of a transport leaving of mechanics. They were looking for mechanics. And I paid close attention to it. And I told my uncle about it. He says, "Whatever you can do to get out from here," he says, "because in another week or so," he says, "I heard they're going to get rid of all the kids that have been saved." And there weren't that many. But whatever kids they are, they're going to go.
So you were one of the youngest.
Oh
there.
yeah, I was definitely one of the youngest. I was aware of it. And one day I saw these men marching towards well, it was a big area there. Auschwitz was tremendously large, but I knew where the trains were, where the transports out of Auschwitz were, basically the direction. And I followed these men a little behind them, and I met this friend of mine at that time, Moritz Goldfire. We see each other every year. May 8th, that's when we were liberated. And he was there with his brother,
So this was someone who you knew from home?
No. He was from Lodz also, but
Uh-huh.
I did not know him. I just befriended him there. And we all followed these 300 men. They were all mechanics. And the Germans counted, and there were 303. It was myself and him and his brother, my friend and his brother. And just then, like, from nowhere, planes, we heard planes in the air. And they were afraid that they were going to bomb. You know, the British were coming. People were imagining that this was British planes. I don't know. It was American or British, I don't know. But they sounded the alarm and they gave us the bread, the so-called bread, like a little loaf of about probably half a pound or a pound. It was like mortar, you know, like a brick. They gave us that and shoved us into the train very quickly. We were all shoved in. It was almost basically the same kind of train as when we came to Auschwitz. We didn't know where we were going.
I just want to back up a little bit. Is there anything else that happened while you were at Auschwitz that stands out in your mind?
Well, as I said, I lost my cousins. Whatever family I had was lost, with the exception of my two uncles that came with me. I forgot to mention another uncle and several children of his were also taken away completely with his wife together. Basically, I was trying to save myself and stay low-key, hide, and I was protected by my uncle, who constantly saved my life every time. It was just, I guess, God's will to save me.
Who was in charge at the barracks?
The capos, mostly the capos. I did see Germans, and the Germans were quite brutal there. And I saw beatings, lots of beatings with the Germans. And they were the ones that gave out the thin soup, the straw soup, whatever it was.
How many times a day did you get
I
the
think
soup?
once a day. It was nothing. It was no. I don't remember what was in there. It was like water, like bitter water, just enough to survive the day. We lost a lot of weight. I knew that when I came, I looked not too bad because of my uncle taking care of me, but in Auschwitz, I was starving continuously. And my uncle didn't get the kind of job that he thought he would get from the Germans. They didn't pursue his profession, you know, to get him. So, but he did have a few friends that were there before my uncle, you know. In other words, they came like in 42, 43, and they were considered like the underworld characters in the ghetto that were shipped out by Rumkowski. But they liked my uncle. My uncle was a tough cookie, you know.
Why were they underworld characters?
Those were the people that left first. You know, every like we have the mafia here, we had a certain group of tough guys and strong men, strong arms that were always ahead of everybody else. They left first. They were shipped out before, and they were in Auschwitz. And when they saw my uncle, they were quite happy to see him because he was very good to them. He always, not always, but he was sort of the darling of the underworld a little bit because he was a colorful guy. But we were able to get into this train, and again, we were like 70, 80 people, just the same kind of ride that we had from Lodz to Auschwitz.
How long was this ride?
This ride was, I think, 3 or 4 days.
And you weren't let out of the train at all?
No. The treatment was almost the same. The German was inside, and the can of water got used up in no time at all. The stench was there. It was terrible. Except we were all men. There was no women anymore, no families. It was just the survivors of whoever saved themselves from Auschwitz.
What do you feel kept you going through all this?
Believe it or not, I do it today. Even today, I tell my kids the same thing. Whenever I'm in trouble, I speak to my father. It may be what they call a Bubameister. You know, it's like an old wives' tale, but I do believe that he somehow saves me. I had many, many sicknesses in the last few years here, and I survived. I think by the strength that I have faith that he will protect me. It sounds very foolish, sounds childish, but I want to believe that. And anytime somebody is not against me, I wouldn't say against me, if does me wrong, I speak to my father. I'm not afraid of anybody. I recently, 2 years ago, had a liver transplant and thought this was it before I got the transplant. I called him up and everything was okay. I feel terrific. Before that, I was dying. I was very sick, very sick. Never thought I would make it. So going back to
You were on the train.
the train and everything, and my father's younger brother that came with me also, he got hit in the groin and never survived. He got hit in the groin by this German with a gun. And he lingered on for about a month. When we got to camp, he died from it. It was so bad. He got a terrible beating because he just stuck his head out a little more than he was supposed to from the train to get some fresh air. While we did stop several times on that train ride. They stopped and they opened the doors to get some air in, even for the German himself that was in there. We got to the camp and
Did people see you at all when they would open the doors?
In some areas, some people would see. I don't know exactly the route that we took, but somehow it felt like we were always in Poland, you know. And some Polish people came also and brought apples, green apples. We needed the green apples like it was like giving Mexican prunes, you know. Diarrhea, dysentery from these, because we had nothing to eat, and you can't eat green apples. So the favor wasn't exactly what it was meant to be. It was terrible. I didn't eat the apples, but a lot of people that ate got very, very sick.
What was the relationship like between the people on the trains? How was everybody getting along?
Not bad. Not bad, because we felt like the lucky ones. You know, we knew we were out of Auschwitz. That was the first thing to know.
And when you were at Auschwitz, you said you were near the ovens, so you saw...
Oh, yes, and you saw the ovens every day, every night. You saw, from where we were, we could see the fire, and we knew exactly what was going on. And once we got to Auschwitz, actually, I tracked back the people that were there before, the Jewish people, you know, the kapos and all that. They told us exactly what was going on and how it's happening.
What did they say to you?
That they're taking, these people that they took away will probably last till tonight, you know, till the first day, and they'll be out. By the morning, they'll be all dead. And the operation, they described the operation. Couldn't imagine it because, you know, we came from a bad place together, but we never believed that it is so bad that they're actually gassing and burning. And we went into the showers. We didn't even know if these were the real showers, you know, or it was the showers that they told us about for the other people that were taken away from us.
What was the smell like?
In the showers?
No, with the ovens, with the smoke.
I don't remember the smell. All I know is that the chimney was very, very large, very high up in the air. You saw the flame. I always saw that flame and the smoke. Always the flame and the smoke. I don't remember the smell. I can't describe it. I can make up as something. I don't remember that. But I do remember every time I looked up, I felt like one of us is being broiled there. But we were pretty lucky in this camp.
What was the process like when you got to this camp? How did they register you?
We got into barracks that were basically wooden floors.
What was the name of this camp?
Friedland.
And where was this?
In Sudetenland. It was near the Czech border. It was near the Czech border. We all worked in defense and factories that made ammunition and planes and tanks and everything like that. I worked on a machine that I never forget. It was like shaving metal, and I still can. It's a memento. The finger got caught, and I'll always remember that. I was fortunate in the camp to have been with my friend Morris Goldfire and his brother, because we somehow managed to get an additional job in the kitchen, and always were able to find a little more food than anybody else.
Do you remember how you got the job in the kitchen?
Actually, he got the job, I think, first, and through him. It was really something.
How many people were at this camp?
400. 400. As camp goes, this was not as bad as we know what was happening in other camps, because we had people that were transferred from other camps into our camp later on, and we knew exactly what was happening, because when they marched out from our camp, the newcomers were marched out. They just stayed over a night or so. The shooting was continuous, and it was very frightening to us to know that it could happen to us also if we are moved out from that camp. Excuse me. We worked hard. We hardly slept. The two of us, my friend and I, we hardly slept at all. I don't know how we managed, but we hardly slept. But we didn't want to give up that job, because that was a very good side job. I was able to take my soup and give it to my uncle that came with me there. It was not the fireman. The fireman went someplace else. I did not go with him.
Winter. So it was around September 44 when you went to this other camp, to Friedland,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
yeah.
Okay.
September 44. I was telling you about my kitchen job, I think.
Right.
The kitchen job was very interesting, because after we came back from the factory work, we would automatically go into the kitchen. And the first thing was to see what will be left over for us. There was very little food in the kitchen, but we always looked to a big, huge pot that the same kitchen was cooking for the gods. Now, in a big pot, there's always something left over. Even if you just wipe it around with your hand, we got so educated to wipe that pot around with the hand that we would always get like a quart or 2 quarts of soup or whatever was sticking to the sides. And it really helped out a lot. And After a while, we got very smart, and we found the key to actually where the Germans held their food. And we were afraid, of course, but we were able to steal brown sugar, and that was another commodity that helped us a great deal. That was really fabulous because we didn't have sugar for a long time. My dentist today would not appreciate it, but we ate the sugar, and it helped us out a great deal. The work was hard. We worked till probably 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and by 5 o'clock,
How early did you start working?
we had to be out. It was called Appellplatz, which means we all had to be out of the room by, I think, 5:15, 5:30, something like that. And we were in the Silesian Mountains, you know, and very cold. It was freezing there. And when we got out in the morning, whether it was frost or whatever, you had to stay in these striped uniforms that we had. Hardly any shoes because by that time the shoes were already ripped and there was no soles. There was wooden soles. But we each had to count. They would call out, you know, the names of the, not names, numbers of the prisoners. And we each had to say, Jawohl, whatever, we are there. Now, my friend, Morris Goldfire, he had a unique talent for sleeping, standing up, and he was always behind me. And his head would always hit me in the back. And the sound, if you just moved a certain way, you could hear the echo in the mountains because we were like in a valley. And this German, very tough man, he was the worst guy. He was called the Unterscharführer. He should burn in hell. He was so bad.
What does that mean?
Burn in hell?
No.
Unterscharführer was a certain rank of officer, higher than just a regular officer. He was all bedecked with medals, probably for hitting us. He was a murderous guy, and he would pick out, like he would call out Mützen auf, which means your hat has to come off. The hats were also striped blue and white hats, the same cloth of the uniform, and you had to hit it on your knee like almost. And if anyone missed a beat, he would know exactly who missed it, not to be in unison. And he would take you out and give you such a beating. He always had some kind of a wire covered with rubber, and he would give it to you mercilessly. And I was always afraid for my friend that he will be caught, because his head was always, he was always sleeping. But he managed. It was a miracle that he managed not to get caught. Several times he came over next to us to look around who did it, you know, who failed to miss the beat. It was childish, but it was a good excuse for him to hit us. And he was probably the worst guy that I can remember as far as beating. He was merciless, absolutely merciless. And he used to sing a song, do you want me to tell you that? Sure. Moses, Moses, wo hast du deine Juden versteckt? Means, Moses, where did you hide all your Jews? That was his favorite saying. Every morning you heard the same thing. And after that, we got our orders to march to work. And the work was probably 2-3 miles out of the camp. Whether it was snowing or raining or whatever, it didn't make any difference. We marched. And the town people knew who we were, because we were like right when we marched to work, we marched past private homes, Germans. Nobody cared. Nobody, nobody ever said anything. We just went to work. The work was hard, tough. We got our so-called food at the factory. Also, soup again. I should hate soup by now. I happen to love soup, good soup. This soup was terrible. But I always thought of coming back at the time when I come back and I'll eat in the kitchen. So it wasn't too bad for us, for the two of us especially. We came back to camp, marched back, and most of the prisoners, the Jewish people there, went back to their rooms. The rooms I think we were 40 in one room, maybe 10 by 15, with triple deckers. Also very cold, always cold. And we had a situation also with lice. It was terrible. We look forward to these baths that they took us out from time to time because, you know, how much can you take that? We felt dirty, filthy. Everybody was filthy. In the morning, everything was cold water. No matter what you did, there was always cold water, no hot water. So in the morning, if you wanted to wash up, it was cold water. The camp itself wasn't too bad as camp go. As I said to you before, we had a lot of camps that were emptied when the Russians were getting closer, were emptied, and the people were marching. These were the famous marches, and they would stop at our camp. And the people, I would say, at all times, we had a lot of dead people that never made it overnight. They were finished. And also from our camp, there were quite a few deaths. I wouldn't say that the food was adequate, because it wasn't. It was still bad food. I mean, not enough to eat. And people died out. There was starvation, there was sickness, diseases, and everything.
Did you get sick?
No. Thank God. I told you I have my father. I speak to him, and he kept me alive. I did not get sick. My friend didn't get sick. And I was also very friendly with his brother. Actually, his brother was exactly my age, and he was such a nice person, very nice boy also. So we were like very close together. As I said, even today, I just feel close to him, and I know that he's close to me. There's a certain bond, and even his kids, I feel towards them the same way as I would feel towards my kids. Very close. This past May, we did not make it. It was a big year, but I had a very good excuse. My grandson was born on that day.
On May 8th.
On May 8th, 50 years to the day, and that was the only reason why we didn't get together, but otherwise we would have gotten together. But going back to the camp, we stayed actually in camp till May 7th, a day before Liberation Day.
Did you know that the war was coming to an end?
Well, we felt something was going on because we were like on the road. Part of our camp was right on the road where all the traffic was going on. And we saw a lot of German tanks going the opposite way, you know, a lot of German soldiers. And all the camps were emptied from nearby, and they passed by, and there were shootings continuously. We felt that something is happening, and we heard a lot of shooting, like cannons and tank fire, that came from the Russian side, that the Russians were nearby. We actually heard the bombarding, you know. So I don't know till this very day how there were some Czechoslovakian Jews there were 3 of them, had several knives and 2 guns. And they went and also they cut the electric wires. Barbed wires were all electric. They cut the wires, and when they cut the wires, we were told that the guards are leaving. We could see the guards leaving, they're like from nowhere. They just disappeared. And we looked around, and we were all ordered to get out of the camp and escape into the mountains, which was right nearby because, as I said, we were right on top of the
Who
mountain.
told you to do that? Who gave those orders?
These Czechoslovakian, the 3 of them, they were the leaders of the group that had the knives and the guns. And we hid in the mountains.
How did you feel to be able to do that, to leave?
It was just, I felt like Moses, splitting the ocean. It was amazing. It was like freedom. You had a feeling of freedom to get out and not being watched by the Germans. We ran up the mountains. Some of the sick people remained in camp. And we were afraid for them because the Germans were retreating, But we went on top of the mountains. It was a very, very huge mountain. It was like the Empire State Building. You could look down and see nothing, We hid out that night. It was quite chilly there. Nobody had anything. We just left the way we were.
How many people were with you?
The whole camp was about 380 people left. We stayed there whole night. Everybody was trying to figure out what will happen to us or what is happening, and do we see Germans coming after us, We were afraid. We were very fearful that night. And the following morning, it started about 10 o'clock, we heard a lot of tanks, and we felt they just sounded different. It was just a different feeling. And some of the people started to run down the mountains, and they were shooting at them. So we said, we're not safe. But they didn't realize that these were the prisoners, the Jewish prisoners, the concentration camp people who are running down. They all returned back. And by 12 o'clock, we all went down the mountain, and there was no shooting. And when we came down, we were greeted by the Russian officers and Russian soldiers. What a feeling.
Do you remember what they said?
Yeah, the first thing they wanted to know, who are the capos? Where are the capos? And we pointed out, our capos weren't bad, with the exception of maybe a couple of them. And one guy pointed to this capo. In fact, I got a good beating from him myself. But I just felt so elated to be free that I didn't care anymore. This was over, And they were ready to shoot him. They were tough. They were very, very tough. They asked us if we have any gripes against anybody, and to help them go around the area and find the town emptied out. There were no Germans all of a sudden. The town had about 25,000 inhabitants. Everybody left. Everybody was hiding. There was no one to be found. But the Russians really went after them, and they fished them out from cellars, from rooftops, from everywhere. And I remember the first night sleeping in a house that was emptied out. It just was like a wild dream. Like I couldn't believe it. The uncle that survived with me came over, and I remember him, the first thing he said to me, I am planning to go back to Lodz, and I would like you to come with me. I looked at him, I says, what have I got? I know my fate. I have nobody there. I have nobody to go back to, and neither have you. He had nobody. He was the one that lost the 3 boys in Auschwitz, and his wife. Everybody was gone. But he insisted he wanted to go, and I absolutely refused to go. And from there, I left.
You and your uncle, the fireman?
No,
hadn't
the
made it?
fireman never came with me to
Right, he was, the
Freeland.
last you saw him was at Auschwitz.
Yes, I did hear after the war, what happened to him was he got sick with typhus. And oddly enough, I heard also from his wife that his wife also died of the same thing. Now, as I understand, his wife was in a march. When I say march, means she was transferred from one camp to another. And she couldn't make it, and she was thrown into a pool of water, like a ditch. And she was gone in no time at all. He just died of typhus, I understand, normally, from the sickness. I would have loved to have been with him, but he did not leave with me in Auschwitz, and I did have to save myself at that time, and he told me to go as fast as I can. I was hoping he would survive the war, but unfortunately, he didn't. Do you want to hear anything after?
Yes, let's talk about, where did you go then? You didn't want to go back to Lodz, so where did you go?
I went traveling. I went to Pilsen, Czechoslovakia. Pilsen, Czechoslovakia. I went and I found a army base that was American army base. And when I saw the Americans, I first came upon black Americans. Now, I don't know about anybody else, but we were taught in school that Africa is the worst place for white people. I was a kid, you know, I was scared. I was absolutely scared when I saw these black people for the first time. I never saw black people in my life. They turned out to be very nice, but the initial feeling was like, oh my God, they're going to eat me up. They fry me. You know, I was scared, absolutely scared. But a guy came out from the mess hall, and again, I'm hungry.